What is going on, guys? Owen Fortner here, just recording a little bit of football content for you, trying to get back into it. Big shout out to Brendan and Connor trying to, get me back into the podcasting game. Excited to be talking about football as always. I mean, it's all I want to talk about in my life is football. Football and accounting, it seems for me. Um, I don't think I've ever been more excited for a football season coming in. Selfishly, as a Texans fan, it's probably the best outlook for the Texans that I've had in my entire lifetime, at least since 2012, where Matt Schaub had tore his ACL in 2011. Coming to the year, we still had Kyle Shanahan as our offensive coordinator, Gary Kubiak as our head coach, and some decent offensive pieces with Arian Foster and Andre Johnson, who was slightly out of his prime but could still ball out. Went 12-4 that year. Lost some of our bigger games to bigger opponents. Anyway, I'm super excited for the Texans this year. I'm super excited for football in general and excited to talk about it. So I want to go over a couple football topics that I thought were interesting and then end with a newer kind of segment idea called Owen's Faves and Owen's Fades. Normally, if I do this, it'll be a betting style segment where I take, two bets that I love, two bets that I hate. But today, with fantasy around the corner, I thought it'd be a good idea to do two fantasy players that I think have great value, two fantasy players I think might be being overdrafted, or even if their value is consistent with where they were last year, there's potential room for a slippage there. So we'll get into that in a little bit. Not trying to keep this super long, but talk a little bit of football with you guys. All right, first topic I want to talk about. Could Mike McDaniel be on the hot seat this year? Is there a chance that if the Dolphins don't win a playoff game, could he be out as the head coach? So Tua just gets a massive deal, massive contract extension. He's getting what all these quarterbacks are making. It's quarterback inflation with guys like Trevor Lawrence, Jalen Hurts, Joe Burrow is the one that strikes to me that he totally deserves it. Maybe Jalen Hurts too, with how he played in the Super Bowl, even though they lost. But my point is, so you have this big quarterback contract. You start to constrict the cap going forward with a team where, a huge percentage of your salary cap expenditures are going towards your quarterback. And this is a Dolphins team that we've seen, it's been too much finesse. Late in the year, when it comes to the cold weather, when you have to go into MetLife and play the Jets, or you have to go into some of these AFC North teams' buildings, or God forbid you go into Kansas City in the divisional round, you kind of see yourself as just a finesse team in a, pounding ground and a tough man's 3 yards of the cloud of dust football's world with a quarterback who's not quite equipped for it, it seems. And I like Tua. I think he's a good fantasy option. I think he does a lot of things well in, a Shanahan-style offense that he runs in. But it seems like when it comes to these cold weather games, they don't really have a second punch. They don't really know where to go when they get punched in the mouth, and all of a sudden, they gotta pound the rock or go to somewhere else than Tyreek Hill, and it just doesn't really happen for them. The only team that I recall where it was an impressive win. They beat a team that was over 500 late in the year. It was at home. It was against the Cowboys. I think they won by 3 points. It was a late field goal or something. But I mean, that was at home, in good weather. Even if it would be in Dallas, it'd be playing in a dome, so still it'd be good weather. Just seems when you have poor weather, the team's not quite up for it. And it's not the quarterback that gets replaced now because he is signed Tua. You extended him. So now it's the head coach. So just look at the Dolphins' schedule late in the year. Their last 6 weeks could be pretty brutal. And it depends on one team in particular if this is going to be brutal or not, and I'll go over that in a second. So here's their last 6 games. In Green Bay, at home against the Jets, in Houston, at home against the 49ers, on the road in Cleveland, on the road at the Jets. Brutal 6-game stretch. I mean, based off of last year, I think the Browns will take a slight step back. The Texans and Packers are basically the same team. So they could take a slight step back too because they have harder schedules. Um, but this really rides on the Jets here. If Aaron Rodgers and the Jets team is as advertised and Robert Saleh is a good coach like Jets fans think he is, if they sweep the Dolphins or even go 1-1 and win that final game in New York, we might see a world in which the Dolphins finish third in that division. They don't make the playoffs. Hell, talk about winning a playoff game. They don't even make the playoffs. So at that point, you've gone from a spot where last year you were a couple games ahead of the Bills. The Bills then come back in that division. They beat you in the final game of the year. Josh Allen wills the game on his back. And then this year you come in the offseason, if I could sum up the offseason into a couple words, their offseason has essentially been, hey, as long as we don't face the Chiefs in the playoffs in frigid temperatures, we're going to be okay. It's been more finesse. They did nothing on the offensive line that impresses me for getting stronger. On the defensive line, they got Chop Robinson in the first round, Muhammad Kamara out of Colorado State in the fifth or sixth round. I mean, Chop Robinson does not come off to me as an anchor on the edge whatsoever, which is kind of what you need. I know Bradley Chubb is on the pup list, but he'll come back, but he's never been that anchor type. And Muhammad Kamara, I like Muhammad Kamara. I like his hands a lot. I think he's got great hands. He had an interview with Brett Coleman not too long ago, where he talked about watching film and watching the first step of the offensive lineman. So it seems that he's a smart, intuitive player. But I'm not here to talk about fifth round edges with you. So if at the end of this year the Dolphins finish 8-9, 9-8, or worse, are third in the division, they don't make a playoff game, they don't win a playoff game. If by the middle of the year they're a 500 team and they go into Buffalo and they lose on November 3rd, do we start getting that hot seat heated up? Do we get Mike McDaniel on the hot seat? I think we could. I really think we could. I like Mike McDaniel. I think he's a great offensive mind. He hasn't really shown to have that second punch, though, where if his offense gets stifled, that he has another gear to turn to, like most of the other Shanahan guys have. I think Bobby Slowick is in that kind of situation, except Bobby Slowick's an offensive coordinator for Houston. He's not a head coach. But yeah, I think if Mike McDaniel doesn't win a playoff game, or at least late in the year, is not where we expect them to be, where they're a 10-11 win team heading to the playoffs, we're going to see some serious changes potentially in Miami. And it starts up top with the head coach because you paid the quarterback already. All right. Second thing I want to touch on. Could the Seattle Seahawks be a playoff team? I mean, they play in a buzzsaw of a division with the Rams, who have maybe the best coach in the NFL behind Andy Reid. The 49ers, who have a top 5 coach, who've been in the Super Bowl multiple times in the last half decade, and are the favorites to go again this year. And the Cardinals, who are the odd team out, but Jonathan Gannon in his second year, they played well down the stretch. They were kind of like Denver last year, where they played well, surprised some teams late. CJ Stroud had his worst game as a pro against the Cardinals in that second half. I think he threw 3 interceptions against the Cardinals. He threw 5 picks last year. I think 3 of them were against the Cardinals. So Jonathan Gannon was doing something right there. But then the Seahawks. So the Seahawks take on Mike McDonald from he was from Michigan, and he was also in Baltimore last year as this boy genius defensive coordinator for a defense that was hellishly efficient. I mean, they had some ballers, but the front of their defensive line played so much above their weight. I mean, Jadeveon Clowney got 10 sacks last year. I mean, I couldn't have paid Jadeveon Clowney to have 10 sacks in Houston most years. And that's when he was in his youthfulness. I mean, this was his fourth or fifth team here in Baltimore, and he had 10 plus sacks. You had guys in their secondary who played well. Marlon Humphrey. You had Roquan Smith in the middle and Patrick Queen, who's now gone in Pittsburgh. But you had guys on that defense. But the defense was amazing. I think they punched so much above their weight. And I think it's a lot of scheme work by Mike McDonald. They might take a step back the Ravens just without him, but we'll see. And they lost some pieces, but that's neither here nor there. They draft Byron Murphy in the first round, who I think there were 6 quarterbacks taken in the top 12. Okay. There wasn't a lot of room for defensive players. And then there were 3 wide receivers in the top 10. So there just wasn't a lot of room for defensive players being drafted. Leatu Latu was the first defensive guy, go to the Colts. Byron Murphy has the potential to be the best defensive player in this draft. I think it's going to be Leatu Latu, but at defensive tackle, the guy has awesome hands. He's got a great first step. He's a bit on the small side, but so is Aaron Donald. And I'm not saying he's going to be Aaron Donald by any stretch, but I'm saying that, that the height has been debated. And I think at his size, he'll still be efficient as like a great 3 technique for them. And then on the offensive side, you don't really lose a ton of guys. Tyler Lockett gains a year in age, which is, I think it's on the back 9 of his career as a wide receiver, most likely. But you come into the second year of Jackson Smith and Jigba. DK Metcalf is still there. Kenneth Walker gets another year back. He missed 2 games last year, so you expect him, hope to have a healthy season. He's one guy I debated putting on my fantasy faves this year. But I kind of decided on not doing it. But I still think he could have a pretty efficient year. And Geno Smith at quarterback should be fine. I don't expect it to be amazing. I don't expect a season where we go, whoa, where did that come from? That's just not really in his deck right now, I would say, in the cards for him. But I think with the new coach and playing in Seattle, have we lost a bit of the mystique of how hard it is to go into Seattle and win football games? I mean, maybe this is a bit of nostalgia bait for me, but I remember back in, the mid 2010s watching those Kaepernick teams have to go into Seattle, watching Aaron Rodgers have to go into Seattle, and those cold, it's always so cold and rainy there, and the fans, the decibel levels are absolutely insane. And those Legion of Boone teams were so much fun to watch. And Russell Wilson was doing good things with Marshawn Lynch on the offensive side. Guys like Doug Baldwin. Greg Olsen was there for a tiny bit of time. But it was mostly the Marshawn Lynch, Russell Wilson show. And that defense was incredible. Maybe it's a bit of nostalgia bait that I want to see them host a playoff game again. Because there's nothing better to me than watching teams have to go into that place and, shiver their way to the coin toss. But I think when you have a head coaching change, Pete Carroll, it seemed a little stale there at the end, but you keep the same kind of mentality defensively, where you're not going to an offensive head coach. I think that's a team, it's a geographical place in which I think a defensive head coach is not only can work, but I think is preferred in a cold weather place like that, where you need to get the defense right. Teams cannot come in here and expect to play offense well. They just come in here expecting a fucking dogfight. And I'm looking at their schedule, and late in the year, there's some wins here. They play the Cardinals twice in their last 7 weeks. They play the Rams, albeit on the road, but that'll be good weather. They play the Vikings at home. That should be a win. Packers at home. We'll see. That'll be a tough game. That'll be a pick 'em, I would assume. So could we see them get into the playoffs as like a 5, 6, 7 seed? Last time I checked on Hard Rock, they were favorites to win over, I believe it was 7.5 games. They're favorites to be at least 8 wins. I think that could be a 9-win team. And I think their defense is going to be so much better than we're going to give credit for. But we'll see. We'll see. That's a team I think could be that. Generally there's like half the teams that were in the playoffs, half the 14 teams don't make it again. I think the Seahawks are one of those teams that finds their way in. A quick take on the new hip drop tackle rule. So hip drop tackles are now banned in the NFL. Which is it's just going to be so tough on defensive players. It just gets tougher every year. Imagine you're a middle linebacker, right? And you're lining up in man coverage or a soft hook zone against Sam Laporta. And Sam Laporta runs a stick and knot on you over the middle. And, he catches it and he's running by you. And the best thing you could do is put your arms around him and just drop your weight. Well, that's not allowed anymore. Sorry, you can't do that. Too many players are getting hurt. And I get it. But my take here is, now it's an illegal play to do that. So are we going to see more personal fouls in game because of this? I actually don't think so. I think a lot of this is going to be handled on the back end. I think if you really want to hurt players with the hip drop tackle, you start attacking their wallet. And you don't want to. I think it's a win-win because you start attacking their wallet, so they probably do it less there. And then you don't want to affect the flow of the game. You don't want one tackle that in these plays happen. The average play is just seconds long. So it's really tough to expect even the players to try to find new techniques to tackle somebody in a late game situation. So you don't really want to alter the game too much or take a win off somebody's board because of a hip drop tackle. So I think it's going to happen where you're going to see fines happening on the back end and less penalties being called in game. Now, you could have said that when you had hits to the head happening, years ago. And now they're throwing flags all over the place for that. So maybe eventually we'll get to the place where more flags are being thrown. But I think this year and maybe next year, and the NFL is always changing, so maybe the hip drop tackle will come back. But at least going into this year, I expect it to be handled more on the back end. Okay. What the hell? Okay, sorry about that. Anyway. All right, so last thing before I get into my fantasy faves. All right, so I put my bet of the year out earlier this year. I've never really done a bet of the year. And when I say bet of the year, I'm looking for something that's more of a long-term play. I'm not going into week one saying, "Oh, bet of the year is Colts money line over Texans." It's not really what I consider a bet of the year. However, my bet of the year is I think the Lions are going to win the NFC. On the Hard Rock app, plus 575. The first thing I want to touch on here is some of the turmoil that's happened with some other teams in the NFC. Let's start with the Niners. Two of their biggest stars are holding out currently. Trent Williams, Brandon Ayuk. The season is right around the corner. Now they got to get Trent Williams paid. That has to happen. The 49ers are not a Super Bowl contender without Trent Williams. Done, end of story. That is the best left tackle in sports. That is maybe the best pound-for-pound player in the NFL. If you take quarterbacks out of it, because obviously quarterbacks hold more value than any other position in sports. But if you take quarterbacks out, that is the best player in all of football, is Trent Williams. You got to get him paid. So a little bit of turmoil there. And the Brandon Ayuk situation is not quite as big, but it's just annoying. It's just there's just so much noise happening out of San Francisco that you assume it's going to carry into the regular season a little bit. And, it's really tough to repeat as going to the Super Bowl twice in 2 years. It's a lot of mileage on your tires. These players might start to think, well, a lot of guys got to get paid. A lot of young Purdy's got to get extended probably next year. There's a lot going on here where I know they're the favorites to go back to the Super Bowl, but can we trust them to do so? I don't know. Being the favorite, that's not who I want to bet on. The Lions are the second favorite. Right behind them are teams like the Eagles, who I like the Eagles roster quite a bit. I think the loss of Kelsey and Fletcher Cox is big. The Kelsey one more than Cox because you have an answer for Fletcher Cox at the middle with um, Jordan Davis out of Georgia a couple years ago, and you take Jalen Carter too last year. So you got some guys on the defensive line to take over, and they drafted some defensive backs who I really like, and Cooper DeJean. Is it Quinion Mitchell? Is that the guy out of Toledo, I believe? Who they took in the first round. So both guys who I really like, who I think help with their secondary issues, which God knows they had a ton of last year. James Bradbury seems to not be a starting quarterback in the NFL. Not a hot take there. But there's turmoil there. I mean, we've heard throughout the offseason that Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni are having a bit of a rift. Jalen Hurts doesn't trust Nick Sirianni at the whiteboard. I mean, when you have an offensive head coach who, as soon as Shane Steichen leaves and goes to the Colts, their offense plummeted. They could not run the ball. Their pass game fell apart too. I know A.J. Brown had an awesome first half of the year, but it really fell apart. I mean, the team just kind of crumbled late in the year. There seemed to be just like a lack of intensity and I don't know, trust in the team, and it almost felt inevitable they were going to lose that game to the Buccaneers. It just, I don't know, just felt off. And I don't think that's going to get a ton better this year with, even though they added Saquon Barkley and the defensive pieces that I mentioned. That rift between Sirianni and Hurts, your coach and quarterback rift, is maybe the biggest thing on your team. So that would scare me away from them. The team beneath them that I worry about for the Lions would be the Packers. The Packers didn't get a ton better in the offseason. They drafted the tackle, the kid out of Arizona. And this is one of those teams with the Packers where when it comes to drafting and developing offensive linemen, I'm not even questioning what they're doing. I just give them the benefit of the doubt. Going to trust them all the way. They've done it for years. Ever since I've been watching and studying football, they've been doing it all my life. So I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt there. Jordan Love, you hope he takes the next step. He just got paid big, but that contract won't kick in just yet. So I think those games where you see the Packers and the Lions play against each other are going to be really telling on which team you're going to trust. But I don't know. Still give me the Lions. They're more developed. And yeah, let's get into the Lions. Just quickly. I know Brendan's going to love that, but just quickly get into them. The Lions just simply got better this offseason. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. You got three rookies last year, 4 if you count Jack Campbell, although I don't know a ton about Jack Campbell, admittedly. I'm going to assume that he was decent, or at least on the positive side last year, and he's only going to get better. But focusing on Jahmyr Gibbs, Laporta, and Brian Branch, these guys are all dogs. They are just going to continue to get better. It seems to me the Lions front office over these past few drafts, taking Penei Sewell, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and the guys that I mentioned, they're becoming one of these front offices where, similar to the Packers with offensive linemen, where I'm just saying, yep, you're good. No questions here. Terrion Arnold, I'm just going to assume he's going to be awesome. The kid out of Missouri that they drafted, Eris or Aaron something, I'm going to assume he's going to be awesome. They take DJ Reader, who I'm admittedly a big DJ Reader fan. He played at Clemson, defensive tackle, taken in the 6th round by the Texans. And he was a great part of that interior for the Texans team. You could not run the ball against DJ Reader. And he wasn't the biggest guy either, but he's just so athletic and so good at splitting double teams. It was really tough to run the ball inside in the A and B gaps on his side of the ball. And then admittedly, you have J.J. Watt on the other side of him, wreaking havoc wherever he goes, that future Hall of Famer. And then their offense, who they lose? I think they lost one of their wide receivers, either Josh Reynolds or there's another one that started with an R. But your main pieces are here. You re-sign Penei Sewell. Your offensive line is going to be amazing. It's going to be the best offensive line in the league. No questions about it. It's really tough to have a great offensive line in the NFL with how dominant these defensive players are, how fast and athletic they are. Really tough to do that. So it's amazing what the Lions have built. So they have like such a culture there of toughness and grit. It's MCDC, baby. So you expect them to run the ball really well. I believe in Jared Goff. I think with him and Amon-Ra and Jahmyr Gibbs out of the backfield, you just assume that they're going to be proficient on the offensive side of the ball yet again this year. So if I look at their schedule, late in the year, it could be a little tough. It could be a little tough late in the year. They finish off their AFC South games, starting with the Texans. That game is on Sunday Night Football on NBC. That'll be fun. They put the Jaguars and Colts. They should go 2-1, if not 3-0 in those games. Like that Texans game could be I'm not going to say a pick 'em. I think the Lions would be favorites, but it would be close. It'd be like 1.5, 2.5 points. They'll be favorites against the Colts and the Jaguars, assumedly. But then you got the Bears, the Packers, the Bills, Bears again, 49ers, finish off the Vikings. Vikings shouldn't be tough, but if the Bears are gritty, and the Bears played hard, even with Justin Fields against the Lions last year. I remember watching those games and being, man, the Bears are looking good. But what the Lions need to do is they got to win the division. And I don't even know if you need to be first place in the NFC. Because what I love about the Lions, and it's the opposite of with what I talked about with the Dolphins, is their game just translates. Their running attack, their toughness, their offensive line, I don't care where you at. They could be playing in Antarctica, on the moon, in my living room. I don't care. They're going to dominate. So I'm not worried about them, if they have to go to San Francisco or if they have to go to Philadelphia. It's like, I don't care. I don't care where they have to go. They're going to be awesome. Now, saying that, they played 2 home playoff games last year, and then they lost to San Francisco in a game in which they were up big, if not for a fluky big Brandon Ayuk gain, and then a big Laporta drop, and Gibbs may have fumbled too. If not for those plays, we're talking about the Lions against the Chiefs in the Super Bowl, which they beat the Chiefs earlier that year without Chris Jones and Kelsey, admittedly, but they could have been Super Bowl champions at that point. So anyway, I'm not here to play revisionist history. But I love the thought of the Lions being plus 575 as a team that was, a couple field goals and a couple fluky plays away from going to the Super Bowl last year. They're hungry. They only got better this offseason. That's my bet of the year. I've said enough. That's my bet of the year. Lock it in. Okay. So fantasy faves, fantasy fades. I've got my 2 favorites here. A couple guys that, with their draft position, with the teams that they play on, what they have coming in, I've got some pros and cons for both of them. Things that I like about them, things that I could see translating into your fantasy season coming forward. So my first one is Rachaad White, running back for the Buccaneers. So he's being drafted as running back 16, and he finished as running back 6 last year. Not the most efficient runner, admittedly, last year. He was 5th in touches per game, only had 9 touchdowns, not a ton of yards on the ground. So, the efficiency, I'm kind of banking is going to get a little bit better. But what I love about the Buccaneers and the rest of the NFC South is that they play a bottom 5 strength of schedule. Now, that's because they're playing each other, 6 games out of the year. So that's part of it. But he got 64 receptions last year. And 64 is pretty damn good. You're looking at, what is that, 4 per game? That's not bad. That's 4 extra points in your pocket in PPR, plus whatever yards, and he had 3 receiving touchdowns. So, and he only had 4 games last year with less than 3 targets. So they're trying to get him the ball through the air. He got a ton of carries on the ground. Wasn't quite efficient, but he had 9 touchdowns. Another thing I really like about him, there aren't a ton of other options for them to go to here. It's like him and him alone. And then if they're passing the ball, there's really only two receivers that I think are viable options. That's Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. But those are both. Chris Godwin can play on the outside a bit, but I think he's like best when he's in the slot. And then Mike Evans is an outside warrior, future Hall of Famer. But I think they're going to run the ball with Rachaad White again. They play a ton of games late at home. They play 3 of their last 5 games at home. So late in your year, when you come to the playoffs, you're seeing Rachaad White play at a comfortable place, getting the football more and more. And they drafted Graham Barton out of Duke with their first pick. Now, Graham Barton in the preseason has looked unbelievable, but we kind of expected that. This is a guy who, on the 3 interior positions of the offensive line, he's going to be, we could see a Creed Humphrey type situation here, where he is, he jumps in the league and you're like, oh man, all right, they got a top 5 center. I could totally see that happening. And that's going to be so big towards running the football. When you can lean on an offensive line, like the Eagles have done for years with Kelsey, or, with the Chiefs started to do with Creed Humphrey last year, back in the day with guys like Marshall Yanda for the Ravens. Yeah, I mean, he wasn't a center, but you get the point. I think they're going to want to lean on him more and more. Now, my downside with Rachaad White is that they lost their offensive coordinator, Dave Canales, who's now the head coach in Carolina, for better or for worse. And I think they downgraded an offensive coordinator. I don't think they got rid of him and then found somebody better. I mean, they get this guy Liam Cohen, who I don't know a ton about, so I did a little bit of research on him. He was Kentucky's head coach last year. Kentucky was 5th in the SEC in rush yards per game. That's pretty good, considering them having the least rushing attempts in the conference. I assume part of that is because they're probably losing a lot. I can't imagine Kentucky recruits amazingly in that conference compared to their other competitors. But I like that they were 5th in rushing yards. That's pretty damn good. And I can't imagine they have an amazing offensive line, so a lot of that scheme based. He's going to get a better set of offensive linemen here with the Buccaneers. So if he wants to run the ball more and more, he's going to have that option now. He was the Rams offensive coordinator in 2022 as well. The only stock that I put into that is he was in the Rams building since 2018 through 2022 with a short break in between. So he's been trusted by Sean McVay to at least be in the building and to be his offensive coordinator. Now it's a bit catch-22 because Sean McVay is calling the plays there. So Liam Cohen's just kind of learning under him. He's controlling things. He's doing the stuff behind the scenes that Sean McVay doesn't want to do for the offense to get him ready for Sunday football. But this is first time calling plays in the NFL consistently, assuming that he's going to be calling them as the, assuming that he didn't call any for the Rams as their OC. So my second favorite, Evan Ingram, tight end for Jacksonville. So he's being drafted as tight end number 8. He finished as tight end number 8 last year. A big thing here is I think he has room for touchdown growth. Only scored 4 touchdowns last year. He had a couple drop touchdowns that I've seen. So I think that number could be 6 or 7. I think it was a little underutilized last year. I think that could increase a bit. Trevor Lawrence got hurt, wasn't playing well down the stretch. So I think he finds the end zone a couple more times this year. I'm kind of banking on that a little bit. But what I love here is the target share. It's just, it's incredible. I mean, this is a team that does not run the ball that efficiently, despite having Doug Peterson as your head coach. Who would have thunk? But you got 143 targets last year, 114 receptions. I mean, that's amazing numbers. When I saw it, I couldn't believe it when I saw it. I thought they were talking about Christian Kirk. Like, this is a tight end doing this for him. 143 targets. And I don't see that really going down. I don't see that target. That's not because they only had one wide receiver to go to last year. They had Calvin Ridley and they had Christian Kirk. And it's not like they massively increased their wide receiver room either. They lose Zay Jones. They lose Calvin Ridley. They gain Brian Thomas Jr. from LSU, and they gained Gabe Davis from Buffalo. I mean, that target share ain't going anywhere. I'm just saying. So I don't think you have to worry about that. The only downside that I could point out is that he averaged 8.4 yards per reception. So the big play potential isn't quite there. So if you're playing in a league in which you get more points for 20 plus, 30 plus, 40 plus yard touchdowns, I don't see really that helping you out a ton. And the only other thing would be if for some reason his target share were to decrease, it would be absolutely devastating. That is like the mainstay for him being here is the amount of targets he's getting. I just don't see it going down. I don't see why it would. He doesn't want to go down. Coaching staff doesn't want to go down. So Evan Ingram, Rachaad White, my two faves going into the fantasy football year. Now, two fades for me. This first one I feel super confident about. It's a bit of an emotional hedge, but I think it's true. I would stay away from Joe Mixon, new running back for the Texans. So he's going as running back 14, finishes RB7 last year. Similar to Rachaad White, super inefficient last year. I mean, he finished 31st out of 33 qualified running backs and explosive run plays last year. And I don't see that getting better for the Texans, considering the Texans' run game was abysmal. And, I may say that, and you might think, well, they had Devin Singletary and Dameon Pierce. Of course it was. Like, well, yeah, but the offensive line isn't doing him any favors. I mean, the offensive line was banged up last year. You hope it's a bit healthier, but I'm not going to trust it. I'm not going to trust it to be healthier. Like, Titus Howard can't get a full 17 season if he wore Iron Man's suit. Like, it's just not going to happen. Laramie Tunsil is a great pass protector, but he's not the run game specialist that even like Trent Williams would be. And then the interior is just a bunch of guys like Juice Scruggs, Kenyon Green, Kendrick Green. Yes, those are two different players. Kind of plug and play guys, not guys that I trust to build a solid unit around. We don't have the Lions off the line here. So I don't think the explosive run play is going to get better there. And the offensive line is probably their biggest weakness. Now, the Texans have the hardest strength of schedule after their bye week of any team post-bye week in the NFL. It is fucking brutal. Just take my word for that there. I'm not going to go through all the teams because, I don't want to keep myself up at night, but it's pretty damn bad. And then mileage is an issue for him, too. Tons of carries at Oklahoma. Tons more in Cincinnati for a team that was consistently in the playoffs, getting more carries. So when are the wheels going to fall off? I don't know. His target share might get eaten into as well with guys like Cam Akers, who's, he played in this most recent preseason game today. He's going to make the team. And then Dameon Pierce, who, I don't know, man. I'm not buying Dameon Pierce, but I mean, still, there's some carries there to be taken away. And that offense has so many other options. You got 3 stud receivers potentially with CJ Stroud. The only pro that I could see for Joe Mixon would be that the Texans were bottom 5 in red zone conversion last year. I think that could change a bit with Joe Mixon. He is a bit of an upgrade over Devin Singletary, although I don't think he's much of an upgrade. But I'm thinking like at the goal line where Singletary and Pierce had trouble getting the ball into the end zone, Mixon could help that a bit. So there might be some touchdown potential, but I think that's the only benefit, man. I would just stay away. And my other fade is Dak Prescott. He was QB4 last year. His QB10 is his average draft position this year. I don't really have many pros. For a quarterback you're taking at 10, I just don't see much upside. Like CeeDee Lamb is awesome, right? But he's currently holding out. They're going to have to pay him, which inevitably they will. But the weapons outside there are limited. It's him and Jake Ferguson. There's nowhere else to go. The running back room is barren. The tight end room is barren outside of Ferguson. And they're just starting a lot of wide receivers to write home about. I don't think this offense is going to be quite as dominant. And there's quarterback upside elsewhere. Here's a couple of guys that are getting drafted after Dak Prescott. Jordan Love, Jaden Daniels, Brock Purdy, Jared Goff, Caleb Williams. One guy being drafted just above Dak Prescott is Kyler Murray. When there's 6 guys there that I think all have potential to finish higher than Dak, and he's being drafted as a top 10 quarterback, I wouldn't buy it. I would save that spot. I would draft somebody else in that position if you could. You know, there's some other guys going around that area that I just have more. I don't know. I just have more belief in. I'd go Trey McBride at your tight end if you could. Christian Kirk is around that area. Or I'd go one of those quarterbacks like your Jordan Love, your Jared Goff later, your Caleb Williams, the upside there. So I think that's where I land on my faves and my fades. One more sneak that I'll throw in. I didn't really think about including this, but I'd written in my notes. I think Tank Dell has a chance to be, if you play best ball, I think he has a chance to be the best ball player in all fantasy this year. Now, if you guys don't play best ball is essentially where your lineup is not set. Your points come in a lineup based on who plays the best that week. So you just have your roster, and whoever plays the best that week, that's who scores your points. I mean, Tank Dell's upside in this offense is incredible. He's going to get so much movement. He's going to be the guy who, gets the ball on screens, who is running reverses, who's getting deep balls thrown to him. While you have possession guys who I wouldn't even call Nico Collins a possession guy. Nico Collins can run deep. He can do fucking everything proficiently. But you got your possession guy in Diggs, your intermediate to short route runner in him, and then Tank Dell moving all over the field. So I think there's potential for 8 reception, 150-yard touchdown or 2 games for Tank Dell on there. So if you play best ball, that would be the Texans receiver that I would lean on the most, would be him. So that's about it for me. This was fun. I enjoy taking notes. It doesn't feel like work to me at all, talking about football, writing down things about football and just studying the game. I couldn't be more excited for the football season. I know you guys are too. So, just have fun out there. Last thing I'll say, just a word of encouragement. Give your family a call when you can. Try to talk to my mom a couple times a week. Talk to my dad when I can. Talk to my sister when I can. Just give your family a call. You never know how long they're going to be there, So just keep those people close to you and talk to them as much as you can. But let's go football, man. The NFL's back. Could be more excited. We got big games coming up. Let's enjoy it. Welcome to the NFL season for 2024.